Hi, 7th graders, and welcome to Lesson 7.7a, Simple Interest. Today you're going to want to have your notes out and you'll want to have a calculator handy also. Our learning goal today is to be able to solve real-life problems involving simple interest. So let's begin by talking about what interest is. You might have heard interest before if you have a bank account. So if you keep money in a bank account, you will get more money for keeping it there. And that extra money that you get from the bank for keeping your money there is called interest. Also, if you borrow money from the bank, you usually have to pay back more than what you borrowed. The bank isn't going to borrow you money for free. They're going to charge you extra money, and they also call that interest. So those are two definitions of what interest is at a bank. So let's talk about what simple interest is. In your notes, you're going to see I equals PRT. The P, the R, and the T are stuck together with invisible multiplication. It might be helpful for you to put dots in between each one of them. To find simple interest, we simply take the principal times the rate times the time, multiply all of these together, and we will get simple interest. So in your notes, can you go ahead and label the I as interest? And remember, interest is that extra money that either you earn from the bank by keeping your money in the bank or money that you'll have to pay to borrow from the bank. So we'll put an arrow pointing that right here to I for interest. The big P represents principal. Principal is the starting amount of money. So if you put money into a bank account, the amount that you put in there, that would be principal. Also, if you borrow money from a bank, the amount you borrow, that would be also principal. So it's your starting amount of money. Then we have R, that represents rate. And interest rate is calculated as a percentage. So we'll write interest rate percent, and we'll draw an arrow right there to the R. And then lastly, the T, that represents time. So time is always calculated in years. That's really important because if it's less than a year or longer than a year, we'll have to convert that time into years. Okay, so this is the simple interest formula. Let's see what it looks like to apply this to some real life situations. So here is example number 1. In your notes, I'm going to have you fill in $2,000 right here. So we're just going to fill that number in. It's blank in your notes. Let's say that we invest $2,000 into a certificate of deposit, which also can be called a CD at Nations Bank. You will earn 6% annual simple interest by keeping that $2,000 in a CD. So let's find out how much interest, how much extra money is the bank going to pay you for keeping that $2,000 in a CD or certificate of deposit for 6 months, for 9 months, for 18 months, and 5 years. So with this problem, we're going to be practicing using the interest formula. So right above where you see interest, let's write that I equals PRT. This is how we're going to calculate interest. So to find interest, we're going to take principal times rate times time. So our principal is our starting amount of money, and that's $2,000. So we're going to take $2,000 and we're going to multiply that by the rate. The interest rate is 6%, but we need to change that percent into a decimal. So 6%, we can back it up, take it off, 0.06. And then I want to multiply that by time. Notice I'm just using parentheses to show multiplication. So time is in years, and if this is 6 months, then we have less than a year. We have a fraction of a year. So we can write this as 6/12 of a year, 6 out of 12 months. Now you might recognize 6/12 as a half. You could also use the fraction half, or you can use the decimal 0.5. Any of those would work. So let's use our calculator, and we can type in 2,000, and we're going to multiply that by 0.06% interest rate times 1/2. I can use the fraction button, or I can just type in 0.5. I'll just use the decimal. That's $60. So the interest that we would get by keeping in the $2,000 in a certificate of deposit for 6 months would be $60. Now let's go ahead and figure out what the balance would be. Balance is the total amount of money that you will have in the account, including your interest, after 6 months. So remember, we started with $2,000 and we're going to earn $60 in interest. So we can add these two together, and that will give us our total balance at the end of 6 months. We'd have $2,060. That would be what we would end up as our balance. So we earned $60 in interest, and $2,060 would be our total. Now let's see what would happen if we put the same amount of money into this account for 9 months. So just a little bit longer. So let's start again with interest equals, the principal is the same, $2,000. The interest rate is still 6% as a decimal, but this time the time is 9 months. Now that would be 9 out of 12 months, 9/12 of a year. You might recognize that also as 3/4 of a year. If I take my calculator, I could take 9 divided by 12, and I could write that as 0.75. I could do it as a decimal too. Okay, so let's go ahead and multiply 2,000 times 0.06 times, I'm going to do the decimal, 0.75. And that's $90. So I would earn $90 interest, and it should be a little bit more than 6 months. We can see we're only earning $30 more. So now to figure out our balance at the end of the 9 months, we'd take our $2,000 that we started with, our original principal, and we're going to add the $90 we earn in interest, and we would have $2,090 at the end of the 9 months. So see how that formula works? Now, what happens if I leave it in there quite a bit longer, 18 months? So let's calculate the interest. Simple interest equals principal times the 6% rate, and we want to multiply it by time. Now remember, time is calculated in years. So if 18 months, I need to think about how many years is that. I know that there's 12 months in a year, and 12 plus 6 gives me 18. So it looks like we have a full year and then a half a year. So this is 1.5 years, a year and a half. Let's see what would happen. So $2,000 times 6% interest times 1.5 years. We earn $180 in simple interest. Well, being that 18 months is twice as long as 9 months, doesn't it make sense that the interest would be twice as much? Okay, so let's find the principal. Do you remember how to do that? We want to take the $2,000 that we started with, add the $180 we earned in interest, and we would end up with a balance at the end of 18 months. $2,180 would be our balance. So to find our balance, we have to add the interest back onto the principal that we started with. Okay, let's find out what would happen if we didn't touch that money for 5 years. So let's calculate interest now. We're leaving in there for 5 years. $2,000, 6%, and we're going to multiply it by time. And because this is exactly 5 years, we can put just exactly 5. So we're going to take $2,000 times 0.06 interest rate times 5 years, $600. Wow, that's how much interest we would earn. That's a lot just by leaving our money in the bank. All right, so principal, $2,000, and at the end of 5 years, we would earn another $600 in interest for a total of $2,600 at the end of the 5 years. So it makes sense to put our money in the bank because we get to earn more money called interest. So this is just practicing that interest formula on this example. Okay, let's take a look at example number 1. In example number 1, we're going to borrow $8,000 to buy our very first car. It's going to be a used car, and it's going to cost us $8,000. So if we borrow $8,000 to buy a car at a simple interest rate of 7.6%, and we're going to keep this loan for 3.5 years, let's see if we can calculate how much interest we will have to pay. So maybe we decide to borrow this money from our dad or our mom or a family member. Most of the time, banks don't give out simple interest loans, but maybe a car dealership would, or maybe a family member would. Okay, so interest equals principal, which is $8,000. That's the amount of money we want to borrow. And we're going to multiply that by the interest rate, which is the percentage. So if we can back it up, take it off, this is 0.076. So I'm going to multiply that by 0.076. I suppose I didn't need the dot here. I'm just going to use parentheses. There we go. Hopefully that's not too confusing. Okay, and then we're going to multiply that by the time, principal times rate times time. So time is going to be 3.5 years. That number can go right here, 3.5. Then it's just simply using our calculator. Let's type in how much simple interest are we going to have to pay. 8,000 times 0.076, that's 7.6%. And we're going to multiply that by 3.5 years. And I get $2,128, and that is interest. So that is the interest that we're going to have to pay to borrow that money for 3.5 years. We're not going to be borrowing it for free. We're going to have to pay somebody some interest. Okay, our next question asks us, what is the total amount or the total balance that you have to pay for the car loan? So remember, you borrowed $8,000. You still have to pay that $8,000 back, but you also have to pay the interest, the $2,128. That was interest. You have to pay that also. So if we add the two of them together, that will give us our total balance. So I'm going to leave the interest amount in my calculator, and I'm going to go plus 8,000. So a total of $10,128 for the car loan. That would be how much I would pay in total. So that $8,000 car is going to end up costing me a little over $10,000 after I pay it all off. All right, let's take a look at another example where we might be using simple interest. So this is an example of Steve buying an appliance at an appliance store. And if Steve doesn't have $3,333 to buy this refrigerator, he can borrow it through some special financing at the appliance store, and they're going to charge him simple interest. So the store offers a special finance rate of 2%. Let's fill that in. Simple interest rate. So what will Steve pay after 12 months? So maybe they're going to give him this interest rate for 12 months, and he has to have that refrigerator paid back. Well, let's use our formula. Interest equals, we need to figure out first how much interest is Steve going to get charged. So principal this time is that starting amount of money, $3,333, and we want to multiply that by the rate. Back it up, take it off, 0.02. Want to change that percent to a decimal. And then we want to multiply it by the time. Now remember, the time has to be in years. So if I put 12 right here, that means he's paying it back for 12 years. We don't want 12 years. This is 12 months. How many years is that? That's 1 year. So it's important that we have our time in years. All right, let's use the calculator and see if we can 3332 times 0.02%, or 2% interest, times 1 year. Looks like we're going to have to pay $66.64 in interest. That's what Steve will have to pay in interest. But let's go back to the question. It said, what will Steve pay after 12 months? That means what will he pay for the refrigerator? He's not going to pay $66 for that refrigerator. No way. Remember, he borrowed $3,332 for the refrigerator. He has to pay all of that back. Plus, he also has to pay the $66.64 of interest. He has to pay both of them back. So that's going to give us a total amount of money, 3,332 plus $66.64. Looks like he will be paying $3,398.64 for that refrigerator after a year's time. So of course it's going to be a little bit more, but he was able to take the refrigerator even though he didn't have the money for it. He was able to get a loan for it and pay it back with some interest. All right, let's take a look at example number 3. On this one, it's going to be a little different because the question here says, how do I find the interest rate using simple interest formula. So this time we're going to be figuring out how to find the rate. The rate is what's going to be unknown. So we're going to have to use the formula differently. So let's fill in our numbers here to start a mobile dog grooming service. Ooh, that sounds exciting. We want to borrow $8,500. So maybe that's going to be our vehicle to drive around for our mobile pet grooming service and some of the materials we're going to need for that. We want to take a loan out for 2 years. So we're going to borrow this much money for 2 years. And the amount of simple interest that this woman paid was $1,581. That's what she paid in simple interest. We're wondering what interest rate was she charged. And remember, interest rate, that's a percentage. So what was her percent of interest that she needed to pay? So let's first begin by writing our formula. Interest equals principal times rate times time. And we're going to plug in the numbers that we know, or substitute the numbers in that we know in that formula. We know that she borrowed $8,500. That is a starting amount. That's our principal. So we're going to put $8,500 right there in place of P. I'm just going to write it right below the formula. And then right here for rate, do we know the rate? It's asking us what is the interest rate. So we don't know that interest rate. So I'm going to put R here for interest rate. Remember, these are being multiplied together. And then right here for time, we do know that it's for 2 years. So I'm going to put time, I'm going to plug in a 2. So do you see how the R is the unknown value? Over here we have interest. Do we know the interest? It says that she paid a simple interest amount of $1,581. So do you notice here how now I end up with an equation where I can solve for this one variable rate? What is the interest rate that would give me this amount of simple interest? Well, let's simplify over here. Do you see on this side the $8,500 times 2? These two numbers can be simplified. We can multiply 8,500 times 2 and put that together as one number. So let's do that first. 8,500, and we want to double it by multiplying by 2, 17,000. So I can rewrite these two numbers. I can multiply them together and get 17,000, and then I can bring down times R. Okay, so I just simplified this by multiplying those two numbers, and I'm going to rewrite everything. Okay, now do you see how I have a one-step equation? I have $17,000 times what number R is equal to 1,581. Does it look like an equation now? Absolutely, it's a one-step equation. What's the inverse or opposite operation of multiply? You got it, division. What if I divided by 17,000? I would get R all by itself. And if I did the same thing over here and divided by 17,000, let's see what the calculator says. Top number, 1,581, divided by 17,000, I get 0.093 equals R. Now remember, R is a percentage. It's an interest rate. So right here I have a decimal. So I have to change the decimal into a percentage. To change a decimal to a percentage, we're going to go move it, and add the percent sign. So decimal point goes here. That looks like it would be 9.3% interest rate. So looks like this woman was charged a 9.3% interest rate to borrow that money. So we were able to use the formula to find a missing part instead of finding the interest. We're going to try one more where we have to do that. Here's our example number 4. This time we're going to see if we can use the formula to find time, which is this one right here. So time is going to be our unknown. A student took out a loan for $1,800. The interest rate was, let's fill in 10%, and he paid $45 in simple interest. But how long did it take the student to pay off the loan? How long was the loan for? Do you see how we're searching for time? So let's start with the formula that we know. Interest equals principal times rate times time. And let's fill in the numbers that we know. Student took out a loan for $1,800. Well, that's the principal. That's our starting amount, $1,800. We're going to multiply that by the rate. Do we know the rate? Yes, we do. It's 10%. What are we going to change 10% into? A decimal. So we're going to go back it up, take it off, 0.10. So this number is, maybe I'll use parentheses. Sometimes that helps if there's a decimal because we know that's multiply, 0.10. And then we have to multiply that by time. Do we know time? No, we don't because we're asked how long. So we'll just use a T. And then that equals the interest. Do we know the interest paid? Yes, $45. So I plugged in all the numbers that I do know, and the unknown number is time. So now what I have is an equation. But do you see how here we have 1,800 times 0.10 times t? Do you see how these two numbers can be multiplied together to form one number? Let's simplify that. So we're going to take 1,800 and we're going to multiply it by 0.10, and that's going to give us 180. So I can rewrite these two numbers, multiply them together, and call it 180. And then times t equals 45. So I'm going to bring down what I know. And do you see how I have a one-step equation now? We're trying to solve for t, and it's being multiplied to 180. We can use the inverse operation of divide. And that would give us time. And if I divide this side by 180 also, this is going to give me the time that the student took the loan out for. So top number 45 divided by bottom number 180, 0.25. Now remember, time is always in terms of years. So this is saying 0.25 years. Well, it kind of sounds funny to say 0.25 years. What fraction is 0.25? Wouldn't that be 1/4? I could say 1/4 of a year. Better yet, how many months is 1/4 of a year? If there's 12 months in a year, wouldn't 1/4 be 3 months? So these are all correct, but probably the one that would make the most sense would be 3 months. Sometimes we'll see the time in this formula as years, but a lot of times we'll see months. So 1/4 of a year or 3 months, both of those would be really acceptable answers. This one, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. We don't usually say 0.25 years. All right, let's go to our summary. Let's look at what we've done in our summary here. In your summary, a couple important vocab words that we learned today was balance. We had to use the simple interest formula to find interest, and then once we found interest, we could figure out the balance. So balance is total amount of money, including any interest. That gets us our balance. Principal is another word. Principal is the starting amount of money, and that's in our formula right here. That's our principal. Then a couple steps we had to do along the way. We had to change any interest rate percent into a decimal. So anytime we used, when we were given a percentage rate, we always had to change to a decimal. Just like we've been doing in everything in this unit. And then lastly, time is always in years. And that can be a fraction of a year if it's less than a year. Sometimes it's more than a year. But time always has to be in years. All right, thank you for joining me for lesson 7.7a, and I hope you have a great day.